There are people living up in Donegal and down along the northwest that their houses are so badly built that they don't. Physical health effects, I think we're only at the tip of the iceberg in relation to that. In relation to what George said, you're 100% right when you're talking about people who are on the margins. I personally believe, and the Housing Commission had this in its report, that we need to actually merge cost rental and social housing, if that makes sense, and to have almost a universal eligibility for public housing, because the fact of the matter is the more you earn, the more rent you pay anyway. And it is another way as well of making public housing, of allowing, say, the rent to cover the real cost of the maintenance and construction of it. If you expand out its eligibility, I have it here the whole time. In my own constituency office, certain social welfare payments are counted, others aren't, and there's no certainty across all the local authorities. And in relation to what Dermot Lacey said about the department, I mean, the Department of Housing are literally have interfered in estate regeneration in Dublin around very simple projects, because they are absolutely obsessed with hemming more into physical places where you can't fit anymore. And like, if you want to know why the housing system in this country from the department's point of view is dysfunctional, just look at what the department are doing in terms of estate regeneration with Dublin City Council. Like, if I went into it, I'd be here till the Labour Party is 200 years old. So I won't. In relation to what Evie said, we do need universal design, and we need a massive disability housing strategy, because I find from working with disabled people coming into my constituency office, they are often the people who are left hanging on the list for an awful long time while their health just deteriorates, and a lot of the time their health is deteriorating because of their housing.
Great, thanks Conor. So just to welcome everyone at home who's watching the Labour Party conference on RTÉ, and just to reintroduce the panel on our housing discussion, the first speaker I'll come back to then is Una Burns, who is the Head of Advocacy and Communications with Nova, followed by Senator Laura Harman, who's the Labour Party spokesperson for higher education. We have Conor Sheehan, who's a Labour Party TD for Limerick, and our housing spokesperson, who was just giving an overview as to some of the debate we've just discussed, and then followed by Aodhán Riordan, who is the Labour Party MEP for the Dublin region. So, Una, I'm just going to come back to you then to ask you a further question. One of the things I think the government relies on is the dehumanisation, the depersonalisation of homelessness. Nova looks to advocate against that narrative by bringing the personal and the human side into the conversation and into the discussion. You might just bring us through some of the efforts and some of the campaigns and the objectives of Nova's.
Absolutely. So, as I've said already, Novus is a homeless charity and approved housing body, and we work with about 6,000 people annually through a range of supports and services, include social housing, emergency homeless accommodation, street outreach, community detox, and specialised support for people with disabilities, young people coming out of daycare. So we have a very broad remit, and not everybody that we work with is homeless. It's people who are at risk of homelessness, people in addiction, and people on the margins of society generally. You can have the likes of me sitting up and providing data and telling stories on behalf of other people. And that data is really important because it influences how we, advocate and the policies that we want changed and the legislation and so forth. But the lived experience is really key, and that human story of how people, first came into homelessness addiction. And, even though homelessness now is incredibly more widespread than it was, and we have working families, and some of the delegates have already spoken of that, and we see that every day in our services. Fundamentally, most of the clients that we've worked with since we first established services in Ireland in 2002 have been from low income and disadvantaged societies. It's not, normally it's not random. Upstream models can identify people who are vulnerable to homelessness. So there's a lot of inequity and inequality long before the person becomes homeless. It's really important for those people to be empowered, to be supported through a compassionate and trauma-informed lens, to tell their story in a safe way. For some people, we have amazing clients that come forward and want to, say that in the media. For other people, it might be, a written word, something that's anonymous that protects their privacy and protects the privacy of their children. But it is really important to have that lived experience and that peer advocacy front and centre of the work we do, and that crosses, the media work when we're launching publications. And Conor recently launched our annual report in Limerick, and I have a colleague, Stacey, who was a client of Novus's for 10 years, lived on the streets, was pregnant on the streets, lived in Novus's homeless services, worked with our family service, and now is finishing her degree in community and development studies in TUS here in Limerick, and is a key worker across our services and an amazing peer advocate. We also have a TOPPL programme, which is a really fundamental support for people in addiction. So it's a peer overdose prevention programme. We established that after a piece of research looking at the levels of overdose and death by overdose among the homeless population in 2014 here in Limerick in McGarry House. And we developed a programme which empowered our clients, many of whom were still entrenched in addiction, all of whom were homeless, but recognising that even though that you are affected by homelessness or addiction, that you have so much other skills and so much talent and so much experience, and it taught them to respond to overdose, to try to prevent overdose, recognising triggers in their peers, to ring the emergency services, to do compressions, to administer naloxone, which is a life-saving thing. And it's so successful that the HSE took it over as their national peer overdose prevention programme last year. And that's just one example of really empowering individuals to take small steps that change lives, but fundamentally we need the housing to really make the fundamental change in people's lives. Thanks.
Thanks, Una. So, Aon, I'm going to come to you. There's been a lot of conversation this week about child homelessness and using it, the government using it as a means to measure their efforts. Child homelessness is something that you've campaigned on your entire political life. Yeah. So you might just speak us through, from your perspective, the importance of it.
Well, I mean, look, the government plan, it feels like you're listening to a bad boyfriend trying to convince their partner that they can change, that it's different this time, honey. And they're accused of spending too much time with developers and should spend more time thinking about families and children. But I think what you need to do with a bad boyfriend is to dump them. And I think that's what we're intending to do in the Labour Party with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. I think, as it has quite rightly said, the human story behind the statistics is often lost. So we talk about 5,000 homeless children, and Dublin is coming close to 4,000. And you can just imagine the life of a child who's living out of bags, who is living in a hotel, the lack of certainty. Christmas is coming. Am I going to be living here at Christmas time? The sense of shame, the sense of humiliation, the sense actually that society is blaming my parents for my living conditions. I can't invite my friends home. I can't have space to do my homework. And then that leads into all these other complications about moving from place to place. That can often mean that you move from school to school. And that is not something that lasts a lifetime. So we're not just dealing with a case of finding a roof for a child. We're talking about stability, security, and also that the state listens to you, understands you, is backing you, wants to empower you. Because if you're in this situation as a family or a child, you can just feel resentment boiling up within you. And that's something we have to absolutely be conscious of, because homelessness, for whatever period of time for a child, that sense of indignity, that sense of humiliation, lasts a lifetime. So that is the reality behind the statistics. As has been said, and Janet Sullivan is here, her initiative trying to make sure that we end child homelessness through legislation. We've brought that piece of legislation forward so many times in the House of the Oireachtas unsuccessfully. What we're trying to do on the European level is to try and bring to Ireland what is the norm in housing policy in the European Union. No-fault eviction bans are the norm in the European Union. They're not the norm in Ireland. And I think sometimes when we get history lessons from the likes of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and other parties who say to the Labour Party that we're not necessarily as in tune with Irish history. Well, I remember growing up listening to what fixity of tenure meant, what having free sale meant, what meant in order to have some level of dignity in your housing. And that goes all back to the land wars of the 1890s and after that. We seem to have abandoned that, of that basic ability of a family to have that sense of security long term. Now in Ireland, in terms of rental sector, it is stunning to my European colleagues that the average tenancy is actually a 1-year rolling tenancy, that you don't have this idea of having maybe 3-year, 9-year, 20-year tenancies. Look, what we need to have in terms of children and families is that level of security, so they know they can plan for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years into the future. The last thing I say, just on the point on addiction, because myself and Conor hosted a meeting in Limerick on addiction very recently. What used to happen is that addiction tended to cause homelessness. Now homelessness is causing addiction. It's gone the other way around. So on the Labour Party, we have, we're dealing with homelessness, but we're also dealing with the reality of addiction and trying to change, a policy platform on that. And that's why we believe that not only decriminalisation of the drug user is an important platform that we've been advocating for many years, but the provision of consumption rooms for those who are most at need, as we have successfully delivered in Dublin as part of a Labour campaign, that we need one in Limerick as well, and other urban centres such as Cork, such as Galway.
Thanks, Eoin. So, Laura, as our spokesperson on higher education, you speak a lot about the rental sector and how it impacts young people and young adults. So you might bring us through some of the main points on that, but you also have introduced legislation recently, so you might touch on that as well.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I think it's important to say that this housing disaster is absolutely fixable, and the Labour Party has the solutions, and we can fix this crisis. And as well, I'd like to say that the social contract in this country is absolutely broken, and there should be a floor under which nobody is allowed to fall. But people are falling, and they're falling rapidly because of this government's inaction. And I was speaking to an electrician in Cork South Central one week, and he was housed that week. The next week, he was homeless. People in employment are falling into homelessness. And one of the best ways to prevent homelessness in this country is to protect renters. And Labour's Renters' Rights Bill would do just that. It would ensure that renters have more protections. We would end no-fault evictions. We would resource the Residential Tenancies Board. We would implement minimum standards, and we would bring in a rent freeze while we are doing that to give those protections to renters. And at the minute, it's absolutely soul-destroying for people that are renting, that are aspiring to own their own home when they hear of house prices going up. At the minute, your average house will cost 8 times your annual salary. This is completely unacceptable. My generation and younger, we've had the rug completely pulled from under us. Our security has been robbed right in front of our very eyes, and we cannot have a whole generation of pensioners renting in the future. We already have poverty in old age. This is a ticking time bomb. It has to be solved now with this generation, and the Labour Party has the vision for this, and it has the proposed actions to back this up as well. As a senator, I worked with my colleague Nessa Cosgrove to introduce a bill which would ban the predatory practice of advertising sex for rent, which is absolutely atrocious. We know that students are being targeted with this. We know that vulnerable women and migrants are being targeted as well. And we are working with the government to introduce this, and I'm glad that there are proposals being brought forward this year. And that's an example of Labour being constructive, coming forward with solutions to solve this particular crisis. And in Cork South Central alone, if you stand in the middle of the city centre, within 2 kilometres of the city centre, there are 700 vacant and derelict properties in Micheál Martin's own backyard. We absolutely need to tackle this. We need to introduce compulsory sales, and we need to ensure that we collect the revenue on these vacant sites without any delay. So there are solutions. The Labour Party has solutions, and it's incumbent on us as a social democratic party and other social democratic parties to work together to provide hope on this, because there are other parties out there, and there are those who will prey on vulnerable communities and tell them that they'll try and scapegoat others, scapegoat migrants coming into this country. And we absolutely need to stand against this, because the solutions are there, there is an alternative, and the Labour Party has that alternative.
So, Conor, one of the other proposals from the Labour Party is around a state construction company. So you might just bring us through what that looks like, what that means and what the vision is.
Well, I suppose our vision is, keeping in one sense with the recommendations of the expert-led Housing Commission, and it basically involves expanding and the scale and remit of the Land Development Agency. Because we know the Land Development Agency was set up in 2018, and we were actually the only party in opposition at the time who supported the legislation around it in 2020. And the reason we did that is because we do believe that there is a need for an agency like this in Ireland in terms of the delivery of housing, particularly on the complicated big brownfield sites. But the LDA at the moment, first of all, are too involved in what is known as turnkey. And what that means is that they're basically going essentially and buying homes from that have been completed by developers and using them for social homes or cost rental, when the LDA should be involved actually, first of all, in land management. Because here in Limerick, we have the Colbert site, to give you an example, which is ex-CIE lands all around the railway station. Now, it's taking an awful long time to develop that land. And one of the reasons is that is a brownfield site, and it's a complicated site. And it's complicated because, A, there are different pockets of it in the ownership of different entities. So CIE have X, others have Y. And the Land Development Agency at the moment does not have the power to compel all of those some of those are state agencies to transfer land to it. So the LDA has had to go off and negotiate bilaterally, which means with each individual entity, and it's taking years. But what we want to see is the Land Development Agency scaled up like a national building agency, so that it would be able to go in the case of a site like that, and compel the different entities to transfer land to it, and to actually go then and get the site serviced, get the infrastructure done, so that the site could be developed. Because we are entirely reliant almost in this country on private developers in the private development sector when it comes to delivering housing. And we know that the private sector cannot and they will not deliver. We know also that it's extremely volatile because they are dependent an awful lot on expensive international finance from so-called vulture funds. We know that the state has the capacity to deliver. I mean, we're here on the border of County Clare, where the state delivered Ardnacrusha 100 years ago, when it literally didn't have a penny at the time. And we need that level of scale and that level of ambition, because the fact of the matter is, if we keep going on our current trajectory, we will have 20,000 homeless people by 2030, when we have signed international commitments and obligations that we would end homelessness by 2030. And if you look at the way the figures are going, and if you look at this government, they have given private developers and the private development sector every single concession they have looked for. And we are still nowhere near where we need to be in terms of the level of delivery. The Housing Commission recommended, for example, that social and affordable housing needs to make up 20% of our overall housing stock. And that is why we in Labour have a vision for the state to take a much more active role by scaling up and transforming the Land Development Agency, because there is a misrepresentation or an attempt to misrepresent our position and what we are seeking to do by some of those in government who are scrambling. Because frankly, this government, I've never seen a government, you know, after only 10 months in office, approach everything, but particularly the issue of housing, with such lethargy. I mean, there is nothing in the new housing plan, bar a slimmed down diet version of the old housing plan. And they've taken away the annual targets because they know they can't meet them, they won't meet them, and they want the political focus to go elsewhere.
Great. Thanks, Conor. So I'm going to take speakers then to contribute to the wider debate and to speak to the policy paper that's in front of us. So the first speaker who I have to speak is John King. So I'd like to welcome John as the incoming General Secretary of SIP2.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. John King, Louth constituency, and good afternoon, comrades. These are extraordinarily difficult times for working people. There's a real enduring cost of living crisis that workers and, you know, the less well off are trying to struggle through. Food, energy, and of course the housing and accommodation crisis, and it's crippling workers and their families. And it's directly as a result of the failure, as we know, of the successive housing policies under this administration over the last two governments in particular. So I welcome the publication of this policy paper and the critical debate that it's generating, and particularly welcome the initiatives in relation to construction workers around apprenticeships, proper paying conditions of employment, and so on. So we just had our biennial delegate conference in Galway this week, and we probably had about 500 between delegates, observers, activists, guests, and so on. And and I mentioned that because we had a fringe meeting, and one of the fringe meetings was on housing, and it was the one that was most attended, most vigorously engaged on. We had policy people, we had construction workers, and people who are just struggling, who are still, you know, in their 30s, living in their parents' bedrooms, you know, about say unable maybe to launch their lives, possibly as we all did. And what became really, really clear across the days of the conference is that working people don't believe that this government is working for them. In fact, they believe that the government has abandoned them and that they've taken deliberate policy decisions that favour the interests of profit and capital, particularly over the last 12 months or so. And when you look at what they've done with, say, the likes of the delay in the auto-enrolment pension scheme, the delay in the small increase that was to come for people and the rights to have statutory sick pay if they are unfortunate enough to be out of work sick, and obviously then, you know, the delay in the movement of the minimum wage to the living wage, consigning tens of thousands of workers, you know, to be remaining at the working poor, having to make the brutal choice sometimes between heating and eating. Whilst at the same time, and we've seen this even before the administration was formed, pre the election, where they began to make promises to the interests of business. In the budget just gone, 1 billion in VAT cuts to the interests of profit in the hospitality sector and in the development sector. None of that will go to make anything more cheaper, to make it more accessible for working people. It's literally going to go to line the profits, and shame on them for that. And of course, then we also saw this week the government relishing in the fact that they were raising the cap for the earning levels for some of the most senior earners in some of the state-led companies, at the same time that they're denying, the working poor the opportunity to be able to live and survive. So one of the things, or a couple of the things that came really strong out of, I suppose, our housing seminar was actually something that Emma mentioned earlier on, which was really to get private and profit out of housing and out of accommodation, and let's have it more public focused. We need to transform the traditional housing sector into a new public-led affordable housing programme that rents out to all those who need it. It would have the dramatic effect of reducing costs. It would boost living standards, freeing up essential monies to be spent on other issues, whilst also providing essential security for income groups. Construction costs only make up, this according to the Department of Finance, construction costs only make up half of the market price of a house. It's the developer-led housing model that's doing the damage. It's that's at fault, not the cost of bricks and mortar. So we need a state-led housing programme, a state-led housing company, where housing costs are based on construction costs, eliminate the financial burdens that are being imposed on workers by developers and landowners, and actually set a more affordable, realistic, lower bar for working people to be able to buy a house. On the issue of the vacant council or public housing units and rental units and so on, we really think that local authorities should be given the space, the capacity and the resources to seriously be able to address this issue. Local authority workforces are still in the area of, say, what we would consider to be the general operative type grades, craft worker type grades. They're still 19% below the levels they were pre the austerity years. So we really think the local authority sector should be given a key role here. They should be encouraged to build up their housing maintenance units for the purpose of turning these units around in real time, so as to be able to get them back out there for people to be able to benefit from. Thank you very much.
Thanks, John. So I'll take the next speaker. So we have Senator Nessa Cosgrave.
Thank you very much, and I really welcome the opportunity to stand up here as a representative, a newly elected senator from Sligo, Leitrim and South Donegal. This issue, I suppose I'm going to talk about defective concrete, and I'm very proud to say that my colleague Conor Sheehan was one of the few TDs in the Dáil, a housing spokesperson that took the time to come up and visit Donegal. What we're witnessing in Donegal, and there's an estimation that there's 20,000 people at it, and that's being a modest estimation, are affected by defective concrete. This is not the fault of homeowners. Like Conor spoke of earlier, he said that people have taken mortgages out and they're left with 150,000 in debt. People are afraid to sleep at night. They're afraid that the roof is going to fall down on top of them, or the floor might collapse beneath them. This is the fault of cutting corners, trying to make profit, or cutting corners in quarries, but there has to be some regulation about it as well. So I'm delighted to see the work that's gone into this housing policy, looking at housing standards, that the responsibility does lie with the state, the responsibility does lie with county councils as an oversight to see the type of regulation that's going to happen when we're looking at building people's homes. It was listening to the panel here today, I was listening that everything that we spoke about, people living with homelessness, about security, about shame, about stability, this is what people in houses living in Donegal. And it's not just Donegal, this is the tip of the iceberg. This defective concrete scandal is what it actually is going to be seen right down to the West Coast. And the only person that can respond to that is the state. We're the only agency that can respond to it, and that needs the regulation that as a state that we have actually should have had proper oversight in the first place to this. I'm glad that we're one of the few parties that have actually recognised this and recognised the fact that the people that are living in these standards of houses that they built, that they're demanding 100% redress, and they're entitled to get 100% redress. There was different schemes have happened on the East Coast and the West Coast, and I suppose again this is indicative of the treatment that people in the North West, and as spokesperson for rural and community development, I bang on about this in the Seanad all the time about the lack of balanced regional development. And again, this is the treatment that people on one side of the country are treated to the other side of the country. I'm very proud to be part of this panel and to actually say we as a party, we are very much behind people like that. We support you and we stand in solidarity with people that are living in defective homes. Thank you.
Thanks, Neasa. So next we have Deputy Owen Kenny, and I believe the youngest deputy in Dáil Éireann.
First of all, I want to pay tribute to Conor in relation to this housing policy. This really defines the Labour Party's mandate in opposition in relation to protecting the rights of the most vulnerable people across this society. And the fundamental issue here is that this housing issue is the issue of our time and of our generation as politicians. And that's the issue here. And I also want to say that this housing issue is not caused by migration or immigration. This housing issue is a mess of this government's own making. As a 25-year-old, the youngest TD in this Dáil, I struggle to meet people of my own age who see a future for themselves in this country, or who ever believe that there's an opportunity to grow their own families, because they find themselves living in bedrooms that they grew up in, or they find themselves emigrating to different countries. That should not be acceptable in Ireland of 2025. There has been a lot of fanfare in this new government housing plan. But what we see in this is a new derelict property tax. And the Revenue Commissioner is now going to be charged with collecting this revenue tax of people who have derelict properties. This will not be collected by revenue until 2027. So we have another 2 years of rich people in this country destroying towns like my own in Mallow, destroying parts of the north side of Cork City that I represent, the likes of Knocknaheeny or Mayfield, where we see children across this country living in bedrooms, in hotels, no opportunity to bring friends over, doing homework, as Aon has said, on floors of hotels across this country, no cooking facilities. No cooking facilities. This is not the Ireland that we want to represent. This is an Ireland that is controlled and has been controlled for 100 years now by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. They have led governments for the life of this state. And finally, I want to touch on a point that Laura has mentioned. As spokesperson in education and youth in particular, I have met so many young people across this country, and I want to pay tribute to Labour Youth for this. 18% of purpose-built student accommodation in my own county of Cork. 18%. And we have one of the biggest universities in this country. We have one of the biggest technical colleges and higher education universities in this country. 18% purpose-built student accommodation. So what we have is barrier after barrier after barrier for the most vulnerable people in this society trying to access the great leveller, which is education, because they are using housing as that barrier. We see people in this country, young people, in the same rental market as families and single people across this country. It doesn't benefit students, it doesn't benefit the families, and it doesn't benefit the single people. Because as often is the case, as Conor has outlined already, it's single people as well who are involved in this housing crisis. We don't see any action from government on this. But I can guarantee you, Labour in opposition and Labour when we're in government, we will be, we're a party of government, we have the opportunity to solve this housing crisis, because I do not have any faith, as a young person in particular, in Fianna Fáil or in Fine Gael.
Thanks, Owen. So the next speaker then we have is Councillor Darragh Moriarty.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Darragh Moriarty, Dublin South Central. Forgive my raspy throat. I was shouting at Ronaldo the other night, so I haven't fully recovered yet. Launching the action plan this afternoon, the Taoiseach said, informing the current government, I was determined that the housing challenge was going to be addressed fully and finally. The Housing Minister said, this plan is a really ambitious and far-reaching initiative by government to provide homes for people. It is my own and this government's #1 priority. It's about changing people's lives, providing affordable, stable homes, solving the housing challenges that touch practically every family across this country. That was then Taoiseach Enda Kenny and Housing Minister Simon Coveney launching Rebuilding Ireland in 2016. A decade later, and this housing crisis is running away from this government, and this government has no new ideas to fix it. The housing plan that was announced this week was the most utterly uninspiring waste of paper that I've ever seen in my life. I think the repetition of the same failed plans that haven't worked for the last decade are not going to get us out of this housing crisis. Giving developers every single thing they ask for and hoping they will solve this housing crisis for us is not going to solve this crisis. Tax cuts for the wealthy, tax cuts for the developers, minimum standards being reduced at every turn, smaller, darker, more cramped homes, less storage space for our people who want to live decent, good quality lives. We've 16,500 people living in homeless emergency accommodation in this country. That is not to mention the people living in women's refuges. That is not to mention the people stuck at home in box bedrooms. We have tens of thousands of people affected every single day by this housing crisis. Tens of thousands of people over the last decade who've been forced to live in the most disgusting conditions in our social housing complexes all over this state. And our party spokesperson Conor Sheehan mentioned the housing regeneration issues in Dublin City Council. We have the oldest and most antiquated housing stock in this state, and we have a government that has no interest in lifting up the conditions of the people living there. Instead, they want to do a number crunching count. Hang on a sec. You want me to knock 2 tiny, miserable flats into one to make it a decent quality home? I'm going to lose a flat there. They want only to increase the numbers of housing. They don't care about the bed spaces. They want to house fewer people in bigger numbers of houses because it fills the numbers for them. And I think what we cannot lose sight of, what we can never, ever, ever lose sight of, and I really, really welcome Senator Harman saying this, it does not have to be this way. It does not have to be this way. These are political choices that have led us here, and it is the right political choices, the right progressive choices by the Labour Party, by others on the progressive left, who will lead us out of this housing crisis. I really welcome this discussion paper. I welcome the discussion so far, but we cannot lose hope, and we cannot let ourselves not be shamed by the disgraceful housing situation that this government has presided over, and that should put fire in our bellies to make sure we end that for people. Thank you very much, Conference.
Thanks, Darragh. So the next speaker then we have is Councillor Helen Ogbu.
Good afternoon, comrades. My name is Councillor Helen Ogbu from Galway City East. I'm really happy that we're having this discussion today because, as we all know, housing in Ireland is in crisis. It's an emergency. And this discussion paper is something I think everyone, not just the delegates here, but everyone in this country needs to read and look at the solution that the Labour Party is proffering. I'm very happy to say that I'm opportuned to be a councillor for the first time and also hold my constituency clinics every week. And you know what I hear? 99% of the issues are around housing. Inability to afford to even if they have the money to rent a house, but the inability to even find a place to rent. The homelessness issue, like I'm very glad we're bringing this topic now, even Europe-wide, around the mental health effects of homelessness on children, on families. I hear every day about families who are experiencing homelessness. The impact, I see people coming to me crying, breaking down, and I'm affected by it. The fact that children cannot invite their friends over. The fact that children are stuck in a room with their parents and other siblings, not able to have a desk to write their homework. The fact that children are eating dry foods, they can't afford to go to the kitchen and make food that they can eat like every one of us. And we are quiet. It is crisis. It is an emergency. It is affecting the mental health of these young people. And I must say, it's an infringement on the rights of the child. I want to also shout out to Sam for coming up here and talking about the effects of housing on students, young families, young people. Look at students. They are being forced to leave their homes during the weekend because the owners of these houses want to use these homes as Airbnbs. And what are we doing? If you pick up the phone to rent a house, you can't find anyone. But then just go to the Airbnb website and look up for a place to rent over the weekend in Galway. You will find loads of apartments to rent for the weekend. So why is that the case, and why are we keeping quiet about it? We need to do something about it. We need to start regulating the Airbnbs. And then I hear about young people who cannot afford to rent. They can't even find homes. They can't be on the social housing register list. So what are we doing? You see a young person living and sleeping on the home's sofa for months. You see, I've had somebody who came to me and has been sleeping in his car for months. What do we think we're doing to these young people? Why are they emigrating? So we need to come up with solutions. I was happy that this week, Galway City Council held a World Cafe on housing. And it was an important discussion. Because you know what? It's a collaborative effort. We all need to come together. People are blaming the local councils for not providing houses. But we need to fund the local authorities. And we've said that here, and that is something we need to pursue. If we give back power to the local authorities, then we'll be able to provide more houses for people in our community. So this is a collaborative effort. The government needs to wake up. The government also needs to listen to the people. We keep talking about building houses, but we need to now start talking about building communities. Communities is what we need to build. We need to provide resources for people. It's going in the what do we need? Collaborative effort with service providers, with the Land Development Agency, with the government, and with the builders as well. If we look at the records, what is the easiest, the least time in providing home structure is building the houses. We need land banks. We need the planning permission to be processed quickly. And we need to touch base with everybody, asking the communities, what do we need in every of the housing that we provide for everyone in the community? So this is a welcome development. And like I said, it should be a handbook for everyone, for the government to go, have a look at it, listen, read it properly, and collaborate with the Labour Party. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Helen. So the next speaker we have is Councillor Peter Horgan.
Gura Margath, Carrilock, Councillor Peter Horgan, Cork City, South East Branch. We've heard a lot about the problems of housing today, and I welcome this paper as identifying the solutions to housing. But those solutions, as we've just heard from Councillor Ogbu, must be led by the local authorities. It must be led by a state construction company, and I agree with the idea of a state construction company, but to misquote James Connolly, if all we're doing is changing the flag over Dublin Castle, then we'll have no change whatsoever. I have no faith in a construction company led from the capital that will not deliver for my constituents in Cork City. In the budget that we passed in Cork City Council this week, we had an additional 14.9 million on homeless funding. I would much prefer that funding go somewhere else to deliver for our communities, but we are in such a crisis that nearly 15 million extra must go to homeless services. And we can no longer listen to the Custom House dictating housing policy to local authorities. It must be led by the councils and it must be led by mayors. We've seen it in the UK with Andy Burnham and other mayors across the United Kingdom leading transitionary developments there in housing and transport, and we need to have it in Cork and we need to have it in other cities in this country. In Cork City, the Labour Party has been proud across with John Maher, Councillor Ciara O'Connor, former Councillor Laura Harman, who left us with the Upper House, that we have voted in favour of every public housing project that's been presented to us since last June. And that means that we've delivered homes and communities in Leithnamore, in Blackrock, in Scartcross, on the north side. Every part of the city we are delivering, but we can't say the same for other parties. But those homes are not yet built. They're being built, and we will continue as a Labour Party in Cork City to provide the assistance and the expertise to the council to ensure that communities are built there. But we have to deal with the cruelty of the Custom House and how they can refuse an eviction ban for children, as outlined by our party leader. They play accounting tennis on the tenant in situ scheme. They offer hope in one hand and take it away in the other. And it's not fair to deal with people's housing fears on an Excel spreadsheet. We have to delve deeper than that, and I believe that our councils are the way to do that, because we are on the ground meeting people day in, day out. We feed back to our parliamentary colleagues on this, but I would urge the parliamentary party to ensure that the councils are at the centre of our state construction company when it comes to pass. Give us the powers at local authority, and there will be those who will shirk their duty, and they will play to the gallery. But I believe that our Labour Party and the people in this room and watching at home can depend on the Labour Party to deliver housing for the people of Cork, for the people of Limerick, and indeed for the people of Dublin as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. So the next speaker I have is Councillor Angela Feeney.
Great to be here, delegates, and I'm so excited by this discussion we're having today on such an important topic. Just to make it a little bit real for people, I'm from Kildare North, constituency of Kildare North, one of the fastest growing populations in the country. We've had Maynooth, Leixlip, Selbridge, huge growth from the overspill from Dublin. And yet, here's the statistic that really saddens me, is that we're bottom of the league for funding from central government. And we've been there for years and years and years, which means that we end up in a situation where I have to tell people as a public representative regularly, if you're going on the social housing list in Kildare North, you're going to be on that housing list for an average of 11 to 12 years. Now, that is the reality we're living with now. If you wanted to buy a house of your own, you're talking about £500,000 in the average house price in Kildare.
And on top of that, if you wanted to rent, if you could source somewhere to rent, you're talking about an average rent of €1,800 a month. My own daughter was in a situation where she emigrated because she couldn't even get a viewing. She got her education, was in a good job, thought that she could move out of home, which is probably her aspiration at 30 years of age, couldn't even get a viewing. And we're in this bind where if you're 11 years on a social housing list, Ivana visited a recent social housing development right on my doorstep. I am a YIMBY, I admit to it. I had neighbours saying to me, do you realise you're going to have social housing right beside you? I said, yes, bring it on. And bring more of it. And I'm thrilled to see it, but that's 65 units that we've been waiting over 30 years since the previous one was built. 30 years to wait for social housing development that's so needed, that we have a long waiting list for families. And those personal stories that I think Una brought today, we're seeing all the ripple effect from that I see in my clinics regularly every month. People who are literally fading away in front of you. Their mental health issues, their children in the family, people in tears regularly in front of you. And yet we see the government not funding in Kildare our tenant in situ scheme, which at least would keep people in a property with a roof over their head. They're not sending the money. So this housing plan, I have to agree with everybody here today, we were looking for hope. We were looking for something radical. It's a joke. There are no targets, there's no measurements, and therefore there's no accountability. And yet Labour is and always has been the party of hope. So this policy document does give hope. I urge you all to read it and to support it, because if we don't solve this housing crisis, this is the issue of our generation. And all those young people that Laura talked about, I see students in Maynooth, in the university town that I live in, sleeping in their cars. I spoke to the student union leaders and they say to me that this is having a huge effect on all the students. They can't attend their college because they have to work, because they have to buy a car, because they have to commute. So the whole ripple effect on the economy is huge. So this is the issue. But Labour has the answers, so I ask you to support this policy document and support Labour in government.
Thanks, Angela. So next speaker then we have is Councillor Fiona Connolly.
As a teacher, we always say, please build on somebody's point or disagree with the last speaker or contribute something new to the conversation. So I'd just like to say that all of the points that have been made so far here this morning have been really inspirational. And something I really like is that Senator Laura Harman is speaking of hope. And I think that this housing policy or housing paper does bring a lot of hope. But I'd like to tell you my own story and then some of the stories that come to me as my work as a local councillor in Dublin Bay South. So I'm really lucky. I live in an ex-council house and I have an extension, an extra bedroom and a downstairs toilet. Yeah. And what I really didn't, what I've always been grateful for, but now really understand my privilege on, is that my living accommodation allows me to get out to school on the school run easier in the morning because I've got a second toilet. It allows me to turn over my kids really quickly for football, for sports, and my teenage daughter doesn't have to share a room with her 6-year-old brother. But so many of the phone calls and the communications I get just all the time from constituents is about overcrowding in their social housing, and they can't, we can't get funding for extensions, which if we had some sort of universal design for an extension with that extra bedroom and with that downstairs toilet, it would really alleviate the pressures that families are under. Because when I look at it now, I'm like, well, we're very grounded in the community, like we're happy, we're staying there, we've put down roots, my children are all very much involved in the community. And when I hear other people with their similar family setups to me, they're looking outward, they're looking at moving, they're looking at like their really cramped conditions. It's having a huge impact on like their educational outcomes, their day-to-day quality of living. And it's just something that I think that we can bring to the table, perhaps, is advocating more for these quieter stories. They're not as sensational, and I have every empathy for the people who are doing homework on bedroom floors, but also there's this cohort in the middle that are almost like a quiet part of this housing crisis, where they're just living in such cramped conditions, like, for example, like moving back to their family bedrooms or their childhood bedrooms with children. There could be like 8 people in a 2-bed house, like parents, daughters, and their children. And it's those stories where like Councillor Angela Feeney said, like, we don't have hope to offer them on the housing list at the moment. And so when we look at being hopeful, I think we need to look at some sort of universal design for extensions and working with what we have, including what Councillor Lacey mentioned earlier with the voids. If we can work on what we have and how we can make the best of it, I think that'd be really good. Because something that resonated with me was when Una Burns flagged about the slipstream, or knowing we can see the trajectory of people's lives, and these are huge impacts that will really improve people's outcomes and quality of life and the quality of our communities. So thank you to all the speakers who've come with such great hope and great encouraging ideas of how we can solve this problem, and thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. So Fiona was our last speaker. I'm going to go back to the panel just for a final wrap-up. So I might actually go in reverse and offer Aon the opportunity to respond to some of the discussion.
Well, look, a lot of what's been said has proven what we've always known, is that we have to have a state-led approach. The local authorities have to be facilitated at European level with changing in state aid rules to allow local authorities to be involved in the construction, in the management of homes for children, for families, for the future, to give hope, as Laura has quite rightly said earlier. It's incredibly important that we do that, because also the local authorities don't have a profit motive, so you can trust them much more than you can a developer. The last thing I want to say, and I really hope the people of Galway West have an opportunity to push Helen Ogbu into the Dáil, because that's the kind of contribution we want to hear. But Owen Kenny is half my age, but he's just shown twice the integrity and bravery of Simon Harris on the migration issues, and just in his last contribution.
Thanks, Aon. So I'll come to Laura next, and then Conor.
Thanks. So I think it's very clear that we need real fast action on the housing crisis, but the only thing fast about this government is that they are fast asleep at the wheel. This is a solvable crisis, and the Labour Party has the solutions, and I'm really proud to be part of the Labour Party, the oldest party in the state, a social democratic party, the original social democratic party, who's willing to work with other like-minded parties to come up with solutions. And social democracy, constructive social democracy, is on the menu for voters, and that is the Labour Party. We're not a perfect party, we never claim to be, but we have the solutions to solve this crisis, and I think we absolutely have to do that, and we have to give people hope for the future. And as I said earlier, home ownership is completely vanishing from people's reach. The average home is 8 times an annual salary now. People are being pushed into poverty in this country. We know in UCC that nearly 30% of students go to class hungry, students sleeping in cars, sleeping in tents. Housing is an education issue. Housing is a health issue because key workers are leaving the country. We're losing healthcare workers. Housing is absolutely a workers' rights issue. We're losing teachers from the country as well, Gardaí, who see a better future elsewhere because they can afford homes. And we need to absolutely change that. 3 of my younger sisters have left Ireland because they didn't see a future in Cork. And we need to give people a future to look forward to in this country. And part of that is this housing plan. This vision that we have for housing in the Labour Party that's backed up by action, led by our housing spokesperson, Conor Sheehan.
So, Conor, over to yourself.
There's just a couple of things I want to say, and I can't believe you're only 50.
Hold on. I'm 49. I'm 49.
I'm joking. Look, I want to come back very briefly to one point Fiona Connolly made earlier on. I think, Fiona, you're a genius. No, and I genuinely, and I mean that very sincerely, because I think that's the sort of literally outside the box thinking that we need. Like, we need to be using modern methods of construction, and we need to be looking at modular extensions, and I think you encapsulated that perfectly, where that could come in quickly. I think, my colleague Owen Kenny, I think, illustrated why he's one of the most impressive and forthright contributors in this current Dáil around being able to say that this housing problem was around before we had increased migration, and it's going to be around after you know, when migration invariably, as it ebbs and flows, it always does. Where there's war, there's famine, people move, and invariably you have to deal with it as a country the world over. And I suppose it's very disingenuous to see Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael at times try and conflate the housing crisis and, you know, dealing with increased migration. It's inaccurate, and it's why I call them populists. I wanted to say, Helen, you were spot on everything you said about the need, literally bang on the money, about what we need to do is build communities. And I think you illustrated really well that there's a huge, huge human cost behind this crisis. And all we're doing is baking in intergenerational trauma. We talk a lot in Limerick about trauma. You know, we're hoping at some stage to become a trauma-informed city. But the best thing you can do about trauma on the most basic level is put a roof over somebody's head, because until somebody is housed, you can't deal with the myriad of other issues that are there. Like housing is the most basic one. And I think all we've seen with this government is they've literally done essentially what they've done with health is they're trying now to outsource the housing crisis into being sort of just a thing that exists, that we all complain about, that nobody can really do anything about, and that is complete and utter rubbish. There are solutions. We are working proactively on solutions that have worked on a European level. We just need a government, a new government with Labour at its heart, that's willing to actually do the legwork and not essentially become captured by lobbyists.
Yeah,
thanks, Conor. So before I come to...
The right properties built in the right locations, those being one-bed units, because the vast majority of people on social housing waiting lists are single individuals. And lots of the speakers here this morning were single individuals with their own experience of trying to secure housing, whether it's in the private rented market or to purchase or on a social housing waiting list. I think we can't afford to keep doing the same things again. We really need to be brave and ambitious. The social cost is too high. Homelessness and housing generally, it isn't something that's just affecting people on the margins, underserved communities. It's affecting everybody now. And I think we do need to look to Barcelona and look at those really brave decisions that they made to protect the people that live in that city. And we saw here during the pandemic, we were really able to reduce family and child homelessness when tourism was paused, particularly in Dublin. So we know that it absolutely works. And I think just that message of hope has been really nice today, and I'd be really happy to finish on that too, to say that, like, Ireland is wealthy, Ireland isn't overpopulated, we absolutely can solve the crisis, and we just need to, you know, do things differently and to create more exit pathways for people and to really invest in our prevention.
Great, thank you. So just for the final part of this section of conference, in the same way that Central Council is a policy making forum within the party, so obviously is party conference. So we've discussed extensively the policy paper that's been put forward to conference. And at this point, I'm going to move to a vote of party delegates on the policy paper, because there was a unanimous view that very much came across in the discussion. So I'll simply put a vote of those in favour and those against, if there are any, in relation to the ambitious document that we've discussed this morning, so that this paper then becomes the basis and becomes policy of our party moving forward in our efforts. So on that basis then, for the delegates of conference, by show of delegate card, those in favour of the policy paper on housing, by show of hands. Thank you. That's great, thank you.
The ayes have it.
If there was
those against?
it would be Dermot Lacey.
And abstentions? So it was a unanimous endorsement of the paper. So
I dare you.
Massive
We'll move to lunch then and back in the room for 2 o'clock. And just to note, there is a Labour Women lunch taking place from 1 to 2. So thanks, everyone. Well done. That was excellent.